As we mentioned, it's Earth Day, and one of the main challenges facing the planet and those of us who live on it is developing sustainable sources of energy. That's what they're trying to do here at Argonne National Laboratories. Recently, we spoke with Argonne senior scientist George Crabtree about the future of energy, starting with a simple but persistent problem. Increasingly, we're capable of creating sustainable energy like solar or wind, but we haven't found an efficient way to get it to people through the power grid. Even today, we don't have the batteries that can capture that energy and use it later?
Not cheaply enough. So in the case of the grid, it's cost. And you want to get the cost down. Our target is to get it down by a factor of 5 for the grid. And that would be transformational. That would suddenly make battery energy storage for the grid economic and actually the choice. And that's what we're aiming for.
I feel like I've been hearing this conversation for maybe decades.
Yes.
That all we need to do is make better batteries. So why has it been such a challenge?
Well, one reason is that we've had a dominant battery since the 1990s, since the early 90s, that's lithium-ion. Sony was the first to bring it out commercially, and it's been an enormous success for our personal electronics. And it's the best battery we've ever seen. So the energy density of lithium-ion batteries grows typically at 5% per year. That's a phenomenal increase, but nowhere near enough to make the factor of 5. That is what you need to be transformational for the grid.
So then how do we get there? And how, if there's a way to get there, why didn't we do it already?
Well, good question, and several answers to that. So one, the bottom line answer is you have to go beyond lithium ion. And that's risky, because when you go beyond lithium ion, you have to build a whole new battery. You're not just replacing a piece of the lithium ion battery, which is typically what's done now to get the 5% improvements. And no company wants to take that risk until they're sure that indeed it will pay off.
Because of the cost.
Because of the cost. So luckily the government is willing to do that, and that's one of the reasons they funded our consortium, J. Caesar, and it's just a barrier that no one has been willing to put the effort in to go after until now.
You've described this storage challenge as one of 3 parts of what you see as the future of energy. So I'd like to spend some time on the other 2. One of them is shale gas, which of course is very controversial.
So shale gas it's wonderful, and it has its downside at the same time. The wonderful side is it's very abundant. The second thing is that it's remarkably inexpensive compared to conventional gas. And of course, it puts out less carbon dioxide than either oil or coal, so that's a plus. The downside is that you have to do fracturing, hydraulic fracturing, and that often pollutes. So there needs to be actually a lot of progress in improving the process of hydraulic fracturing.
In this presentation I saw you give in Chicago, where you outlined some of these ideas, you described, I think it was environmental stability, I'm not sure exactly what your phrase was, as one of the 3 most important priorities going forward. And so then I was surprised, given the environmental concerns about shale that you just described, that shale was on your list of 3 future fuels. How does that get resolved?
Good question. So I put it on my list with a word in front of hydraulic fracturing. It's the word safe. And so it's not sustainable as it stands now. It needs to become more sustainable by becoming more safe.
But your view is it's one of the 3 best choices we have.
It's a promising path forward. I wouldn't say that the jury is in on being the best. Can you make it safe? That's the question. So provided you can do that, and I view that as a science challenge, then shale gas looks like a promising direction for the future.
The third leg of your energy stool also highlights a conventional fuel source, but with an innovation to what some folks have suggested.
Right, so the third leg was carbon dioxide. If you want a stable climate, we're going to have to limit the carbon dioxide emissions or capture them. And my third alternative was capture them and turn them into carbonate rocks rather than putting them underground by sequestration.
Because we hear a lot about capture and sequestration. You're saying that's not the best way.
Well, we ought to consider other alternatives. So the sequestration option has a lot of challenges. You have to put the carbon dioxide underground. You don't really know what will happen to it there. We haven't never done this on a large scale. The alternative that I was advocating was turning the carbon dioxide into carbonate rocks, things like calcium carbonate. We know it's benign, doesn't harm the environment at all, and these eliminate many of the, let's say, potential issues with carbon sequestration. So there's a science challenge there too. The science challenge is that the reaction is rather slow to turn carbon dioxide into carbonate rock. But we know how to solve those science challenges. We get a catalyst. We've been doing catalysts for 150 years. So we make a concerted effort to find the catalyst for this reaction and make it go faster.
One takeaway here is even when you prioritize the environment and the environmental impacts of energy, our path forward still involves different ways of using conventional carbon-based fuel.
Well, I think that's a fact of life. So if you look at how long it takes for the energy industry to change its fuel source, it's typically about 50 years. So if you ask, should we phase out fossil fuels because they produce too much CO2 or because they're simply a finite resource and we don't want to deplete them, the answer is yes. But that's not something you could do in the short term. So I would look to a decades-long transition, and that's why I was advocating that shale gas would be a good transition, a bridge fuel before we get to the fully renewable ones. I think common sense approach says that we have to accept that alternative.
Okay. Dr. Crabtree, thanks so much for your time. Really interesting stuff.
Thank you very much.